Okay.
So good evening, everybody. This is Ashok. I'm with the NMSCA, and today we have Tom Solomon. So he's the coordinator of 350 NM. So today he's going to give us a some like briefing new green hydrogen or blue hydrogen. So it's something. The topic is very interesting. So we'll see. And I know that Tom always gives a very enlightening talk. So we are very happy to have him again in this forum. And before we, I know that we will start his talk, but then before that, I would like to just update you all with just a couple of things that is happening with New Mexico Solar Energy Association. Next year, we'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary of New Mexico Solar Energy Associations. In conjunction with American Solar Energy Society, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary here in New Mexico, in Albuquerque at UNM. And so that conference is going, and we are going to have a national conference where is going to be on June 21st to 24th, so those 4 days. And in our website, we have put a posted some information on that. And also to commemorate that, there will be two journal publications which is coming up. And that is both are for New Mexico to showcase New Mexico's people, product, and projects related to solar. So if you have any, if you would like to take part in that, I think please let me know. And the address is also, my email is also given. And there will be about like 15 topics, the articles now we are writing by different people. And we would like that all our, or many of our members get involved in writing or co-authoring those articles. So if you want to do that, please let me know. And I'm going to upload a post. I'll post some the topics. There are 15 topics that we are writing those articles. If any of the topics, if you find interesting and would like to contribute, just let me know. Then I will I'll send your email to the person who's in charge of that particular topic, and then you can work with that responsible person and come up with your paper. So that is what is coming up soon. So I would like to see you get involved. So with that, let me give you a small introduction about our speaker, Tom Solomon. So he's the coordinator of 350 or New Mexico, which is and he is a retired electrical engineer. During his 34 years career at Intel, he led the team which built and also ramped Fab 11X and in Rio Rancho. So the $2 billion expansion that doubled the size of their microprocessor fab in 2001. He also led the effort to build the Intel's first 10 kilowatt solar array in New Mexico in 2008, and a larger and 100 kilowatt rooftop installations in 2011. After retirement, so he has become a full-time activist. So he was a field organizer of OFA in 2012, and now co-leads the New Mexico chapter of 350org, fighting global warming to ensure a safe climate for his 3 children and all of us. 350 New Mexico's campaign includes UNM divestments, large public climate rallies, public education forums on methane leakage, rooftop solar advocacy at neighborhood associations, and coalition effort at the PRC to replace the power from PNM San Juan coal plant with wind and solar energy. So with all of this, so let us welcome Tom for his wonderful talk on what? Briefing on green hydrogen, blue hydrogen. So with that, Tom, it's yours.
Thank you, Ashok. Very kind words. I'm not sure how wonderful my presentation will be, but I'll leave that to you to judge. So It is going to come up on your screen. Hopefully you can see that now. And I'm going to move this sucker over. And hopefully it is filling your screen now. Does that look good?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So yes, the name of my talk.
Excuse me, can you record this? Oh, it is, okay. Hi,
Yeah,
everyone.
we are recording.
It's being recorded, yes. This is a briefing on the kind of the status of hydrogen and in the state of New Mexico. I'm getting a message from Judy Williams that she can't get in, and I'm not sure why. But
okay, I don't see anybody here waiting. Let's see.
Yeah, she may be having trouble getting the link, and I can't do anything about that. So anyway, so here we go. I put this little graphic in here, this little photograph of the Hindenburg hydrogen airship explosion in 1937 in New Jersey, because hydrogen is a pretty volatile, explosive gas, and we have some experience with it in our past where it didn't work out so well. And I think we need to be very cautious about our approach to blue hydrogen, and I hope to explain why tonight. In general, I think we should defer to just using clean electricity in most of the cases they're talking about, and I'll tell you all about that. These are the key messages that I hope to explore further tonight, but I thought I'd just start with them up front. So blue hydrogen, as I'll explain what that means and why it's blue, it's really a fossil fuel program, and it's not being pushed by the environmental community, it's being pushed by the fossil fuel industry. The carbon footprint of making blue hydrogen is actually 20% worse than the carbon footprint of just burning fossil natural gas directly. And that's a scientific paper proves that. I'll show you that. Hydrogen as an energy carrier, which it is because it's really not a natural fuel, it's very wasteful as an energy carrier, and it's like over twice as bad in terms of its efficiency as just using clean electricity directly. And that affects many, many things about the economics of trying to use clean hydrogen, blue hydrogen, to compete with clean electricity. Job number one, if we really want to solve the climate crisis, which is, kind of my number one charter and interest, and the way to do that is to urgently build wind and solar massively, and then use that grid clean energy to replace fossil fuel emissions from, coal-fired power plants, gas power plants, burning gasoline and diesel in our cars, natural gas in our homes, and et cetera. That's job one. Pushing hydrogen has some applications, but it's kind of like job four, and we have not made anywhere near the necessary progress on job one, so it's a big distraction at this time. Electricity from hydrogen is costly, and in fact, it's so much costlier than solar or wind electricity that it's unprofitable. That's according to the industry themselves. And you may have heard that there is a draft Hydrogen Hub Act now out in the wild from the administration. Came out yesterday, and I've looked through it, and it's got some significant problems. The exemplar of that major problem is that it defines clean hydrogen in the bill, and it allows 3 tons of carbon dioxide per ton of hydrogen produced, and they call that clean. So with that, it's going to increase New Mexico's carbon footprint, not so. Here we go. Why the hydrogen hype? So hydrogen is all the rage in 2021. Not being pushed by the environmental community, it's really being pushed by oil, gas, and pipeline companies. And an environmental organization called Earth Justice published this explanatory paper talking about what the danger is of using blue hydrogen and pursuing what the industry wants us to do. So you can read that. In fact, I'll put a link to these slides in the chat at some point later on, and you can look at them and refer to them after we're done. So the best example of how industry is really behind all of this is in this graphic at the bottom of the slide, which is it's the logo chart from what's called the European Union Hydrogen Council, which is one of the first major consortia that was put together in 2017 to start pushing hydrogen as, quite frankly, as a solution to what the industry saw, the fossil fuel industry saw as declining demand for their product as the world transitions to, clean energy and electric vehicles, and they don't like that for their profit picture. So they started this consortium to push blue hydrogen. And if you look at the logos that are outlined in red, those are all the fossil fuel companies. The ones in blue are some of the auto companies, which are also part of this. And just a list of the fossil fuel companies includes British Petroleum and Shell and Chevron and Saudi Aramco and Southern Cal Gas and Baker Hughes and Sinopec, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a bunch of fossil fuel companies. This is a fossil fuel being pushed program to generate hydrogen. And the purpose of it is to provide a path to sell more natural gas and to delay the clean energy transition. And so bear with me as I delve down into a little bit of science and numbers, because we are talking about hydrogen, which is the lightest element on the periodic table. It's the smallest atom in the universe. It has one proton. And as a molecule, it becomes H2 with two hydrogen atoms, but it's very highly reactive. And so when you find it in nature, hydrogen, it is almost always combined with something else, like combined with oxygen to make water, H2O, or combined with carbon to make various hydrocarbons, such as methane or ethane or propane, et cetera. And if you want to pry off the hydrogen atoms from those molecules to just get pure molecular H2, you got to invest a lot of energy into doing that prying off and cracking. And so that's why we say hydrogen is an energy carrier, because all of that energy you invested into creating it in the first place, presumably you can transport it somewhere else and then use that hydrogen to do some work at a different location with some losses. And then you carried that energy, and it is by and large much, much more efficient to carry energy in an electric wire than it is in a hydrogen tank. So that's chemical hydrogen. It takes lots of energy to make it. Where's hydrogen used today? This chart is actually from a company called WHA in southern New Mexico, it turns out. And they put together this nice little chart. The pie chart shows that about 55% of all hydrogen in industry today is used to make ammonia, mostly for fertilizer. 25% is for petroleum refining, a lot of it to make diesel fuels. About 10% is to make methanol, and there's a miscellaneous bucket of 10% for the rest. And so that's where hydrogen is used today. And how do you actually make hydrogen? How do you separate hydrogen from either water or methane or something to get pure H2? Well, that is explained in this nice little chart. And you can see the various colors of hydrogen at the bottom. And I'm just going to concentrate on these left three. So we got green hydrogen on the left, we have gray hydrogen next to that, and this blue hydrogen next to gray hydrogen. And so let me go through them one by one. So the cleanest, greenest, most environmentally friendly form of making hydrogen is to pass clean electricity through water in the process called electrolysis. And it basically just, the power of the electricity separates the H2 and the O in water, and you end up with hydrogen on one electrode and oxygen on the other, and you collect them and you get hydrogen on one of those, and you can either capture the oxygen or just let it go into the atmosphere with no problem. Of course, you need to start with water, so it consumes a significant amount of water. And you would like to start with the cleanest source of electricity that you can, ideally solar or wind, but some people classify nuclear power as low carbon, so that's why it's listed in this graphic. So that's green hydrogen. It is electrolysis of water to create hydrogen with no carbon emissions. That's the first one. However, about 98% of all hydrogen that's manufactured comes from natural gas or coal, almost all of it from natural gas, in a process called steam methane reforming. And the steam methane reformer plant is represented by this little picture here. That's kind of what one of those looks like. It's a big industrial operation. It involves very, very high temperature steam at high pressure. And you combine that with natural gas, which is mostly methane or CH4. And the combination of that hot, high pressure steam and natural gas separates the carbon from the hydrogen in methane, and you get hydrogen, but you also get a bunch of carbon dioxide because that carbon in the CH4 has to go somewhere. And gray hydrogen emits an enormous amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It is a major source of global warming on the planet today at about 2% or more. So that's where 90+% of all hydrogen comes from today, is the steam methane reforming of methane or natural gas to create gray hydrogen with a bunch of CO2 emissions. If, however, you do that same steam methane reforming step, but instead of allowing the carbon dioxide to go in the atmosphere, you do make an attempt to capture that carbon and then store it, say, underground, in a process they call carbon capture and storage, then they have classified that as not gray, but blue hydrogen, a much more friendly color. And so that is what the industry wants to pursue, is blue hydrogen. The thing is that they don't capture all of the carbon dioxide, they capture some of it. So there's still a bunch of emissions, plus a bunch of other bad things that happen. So about 98% of worldwide demand for hydrogen, which was 76.5 million metric tons in 2019, came from fossil fuel sources. As we said, almost all of it from natural gas. The amount of green hydrogen that was produced was like 0.2 metric tons, which is 0.25% of all of it. So, while they really want you to think about green hydrogen, it is a tiny, tiny little fraction, 0.25% of what is produced today. 98% of all hydrogen comes from fossil fuels with a bunch of CO2 emissions. And as I said, 2.3% of all global carbon dioxide emissions come from producing hydrogen. Okay, hopefully that sunk in. I'm going to also go through this chart, and forgive me that it's a little busy, and I'll cover half of it just to make it a little easier to look at. This came from the European Union, from the UK, in fact, organization called Transport and Environment. And they looked at the relative efficiency of powering an electric vehicle with just a direct electrification, like a battery electric car, versus powering it with hydrogen in a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. And a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle is ultimately an electric car, excuse me, but it transports that energy to the car via hydrogen with a bunch of losses. So let's look at those two examples, starting with direct electrification. So you start with 100% renewable energy at the top, say it's solar or wind. You transport it through wires and do a little bit of storage, and maybe you lose 6% of it. So that's 94% efficient. And then there's the charging equipment and some losses in the battery. And then you convert DC to AC to power the AC motor in the electric car. And then there's the efficiency of the electric motor itself. These are all 5% losses. You multiply all of this stuff together, and about 77% of what you started with, this clean electricity, goes to power the wheels. And this 81% next to it is how much better it might get by 2050 with some improvements. So we're looking at 77% with a direct battery electric car. If instead you use hydrogen as a way to carry that energy to the fuel cell vehicle, you've got a number of other steps that have major, major losses. And the three worst steps are electrolysis, transport, and storage in the fuel cell. Electrolysis is only about 76% efficient. That's the process, remember, of passing electricity through water to separate hydrogen and oxygen. And then you've got transportation, storage, and distribution, which includes a lot of compression because it doesn't store well unless you compress it. and that's pretty lossy. And so just off the top, you're at 68% already. Then the fuel cell itself is only 54%. A fuel cell is essentially an electrolysis mechanism run in reverse. So you combine oxygen and hydrogen in a fuel cell and you get electricity back out, but only 54% of it. And then you've got the two steps related to the electric motor. You multiply all of that together and you're only using 33% of the electricity you started with, solar and wind, to actually power the wheels. So the ratio of these two things is 2.3. So direct electrification of an automobile battery electric is 77% efficient. It's only 33% efficient using hydrogen. And that just makes the economics of this pretty terrible, which is a major reason why it hasn't taken off. Okay. So hydrogen is very, very inefficient as an energy carrier. It has major losses at a number of steps. Now, the industry, I like this graphic, the industry would like to propose using hydrogen for nearly everything. And they literally have proposed, use cases, they call them, where they could use it for regional trucking and trains and urban delivery and commercial heating and high temperature heat and fertilizer and shipping and all of these things, which theoretically hydrogen could do. Just like you could theoretically use a Swiss Army knife, this big, to build your house, right? Nobody in their right mind would consider using the little saw at a Swiss Army knife to cut the wood to build your house, but you could in practice. But anybody in their right mind is going to use, an electric saw and a power drill and a nail gun and all of those things that are much more efficient to do the job. And that is kind of a comparison to what we are talking about with using hydrogen for a lot of these cases. It will have to compete with something that is much, much better, mostly direct electrification. And instead of, having this chaotic Swiss Army knife infographic, the creator of this, whose name is Michael Liebrecht, who was actually the founder of Bloomberg New Energy Finance a little more than 10 years ago, he organized it into this grading system where he puts, the use cases with a letter grade from A through F, and then an even worse category, G, where A is kind of unavoidable and almost certainly going to happen. G or F or G is completely uncompetitive, and there's no way it competes against electricity, and various shades of gray in between. And this top row, A, is basically where gray hydrogen is being used today, right, to make fertilizer and all of these, methanol and all of these ways that it's applied in the petrochemical refining industry. And so this is where hydrogen is used today, gray hydrogen. We would love to see green hydrogen replace all of the stuff at the top and to eliminate that 2.3% of global emissions that comes from hydrogen in industry in the globe today. But that's not what industry is talking about. That's not what the fossil fuel industry is pursuing. They want to expand the use of hydrogen into all of these other, use cases that aren't being done today that will expand the market for selling natural gas, because that's what they're after. And so just keep that in mind. Hopefully that sunk in. So this is the clean hydrogen ladder. It organizes the various possible applications of hydrogen in a system, grading it from A through F or G in terms of unavoidable or uncompetitive. And the top row is where it's being used today. I'm going to now shift gears into a very specific New Mexico example of where blue hydrogen is being pursued. And that is a project to convert the now closed Escalante coal-fired power plant in Pruitt, New Mexico. It was a coal-fired power plant built about 40 years ago, 253 megawatts, and it was closed at the end of 2020. There were 107 jobs there when it was operating, but it is now closed because coal power is really having a hard time competing against really clean and cheap solar and wind electricity. But this new company called EH2 Power was put together. It's Escalante Hydrogen Power, that's the EH2, and they are proposing to convert that plant to hydrogen. And so that's what this looks like. This is a top view of the Escalante coal plant. This is the big pile of coal and the coal elevator, and there's a module in the power plant that crushes the coal and then burns it to boil water and make steam to run a generator. They plan to essentially slice off that coal burning part and replace it with a hydrogen burning module in order to use combusted hydrogen to boil the water to run the turbine. But they can't just do that right off. It's going to take, according to their estimates, about $425 million of investment to convert this 40-year-old coal-fired power plant to produce hydrogen from natural gas, which is blue hydrogen, and also to burn some of that hydrogen to make electricity. And they plan to have it up and running by 2025, and they say they'll create 110 jobs. To do that, they have to build a bunch of new stuff. They have to build an air separation unit, which is an industrial installation that cryogenically freezes air. And, part of that process is to extract oxygen from the air because they need pure oxygen. They have to build that steam methane reformer that we talked about that takes methane with high pressure and high temperature steam and methane and cracks it and separates the hydrogen out. And then they have to build a carbon dioxide sequestration unit to take the CO2 off of the steam methane reforming, hopefully pump it underground so it doesn't leak into the atmosphere, at least some of it. But powering all of this stuff, especially these two units plus the sequestration unit, that takes a bunch of electric power. And so the electric power that they used to supply to the grid, which is 253 megawatts, might be 164 megawatts. By their own admission, EH2 Power, it's a parasitic load of somewhere between 18 and 30%. And they have said themselves that selling electricity off of this plant will be unprofitable, largely because of this. What they plan to do is, they'll make hydrogen with steam methane reforming. They'll burn some of it to make that electricity. They'll also sell some of that hydrogen, possibly injecting about 5% of it back into a natural gas pipeline, which is not being done at a commercial scale in this country, or to make green cement, decarbonized cement. And that is actually a useful long-term problem that has to be solved to decarbonize, our industrial civilization. Cement manufacturing is a major source of carbon dioxide emissions. So that's their plan. This is another way to look at this. Look at that. This is from their website, from EH2 Power. And this is their flow chart showing, there's the steam methane reformer, and this is the air separation unit. And they have both of those running, and the outputs get combined, and you do a hydrogen purification. There's the carbon sequestration, and they do generate power. I put these lines going back to the ASU and the SMR just to show the parasitic load, and you might get somewhere between 151 to 176 megawatts out. The central value of that is 164, and I'll use that later. So that's the Escalante coal to hydrogen proposal. I attended a technical briefing from Tri-State and EH2 Power on July 23rd. They invited me and some others up to Santa Fe, and the CEO of Tri-State was there, and the CEO of EH2 Power, Wiley Rhodes, and they went through all of this stuff. And what I'm telling you basically is what they told me. And these are my notes from that meeting, and I'm not going to take you through all of this, but suffice it to say, if you want to refer to it in some detail later on, it's here. And I just want to point to one item on the bottom here, which is there is still pollution that comes from this power plant, this hydrogen facility, even though it's supposedly clean hydrogen, because they will be combusting the hydrogen in atmosphere, and atmosphere is about 98 or 78% nitrogen. So combusting hydrogen in air will create oxides of nitrogen and NH3, which are pollutants. And so they will need to get an air permit for the operation of that plant from the Environment Department. And it's one of the things that it's going to take them up through 2025 to get up and running. This is a little bit more about the chemistry of what they're doing, and I'm not going to take you through this except just to point out that this explains the chemistry of where the hydrogen comes from, the steam methane reformer process, and where does the pure oxygen come from. It's the air separation unit, et cetera. So if you want to dive a little bit more into how that whole process works, it's on this slide.
Tom, we have a question that needs to be answered right away.
Go ahead, Walter.
It's from Vicky Gottlieb. She says, I take issue with what efficiency is assigned to electricity because much is still dependent on fossil fuels. Would you please guesstimate how much electricity is direct? Footprint isn't accurate to my way of thinking. Please address my question about slide 7 and other underlying stats, re-electricity and its footprint now. Okay. Thanks.
So this is a calculation of how much electricity, and I'll just go through one. Here we go, that version of it. So this compares the pathway of using electricity or hydrogen as the energy carrier to power a vehicle, be it a car or a truck, and how much of that electricity you started with, you know, say it's 100% renewable electricity from solar or wind, and through these various lossy steps to how much is actually applied to power the wheels. So in this case, it's 77% of the electricity that you started with goes to run the car down the road. If you use hydrogen as your energy carrier, you have these additional very, very high loss steps that basically waste that clean electricity, mostly in the form of heat.
Tom,
and you end up with only 33% of it powering the wheels. So that's what that is, yeah.
Tom, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I understand all that, but it assumes direct, you know, you're assuming clean energy source, but that's not the case for the majority of electricity in this country now. So what do you guesstimate is clean?
Yeah, that's kind of not pertinent to this example. This is the best case. So the point of this slide is just to show you how much electricity you're going to waste by trying to power a vehicle with hydrogen as your energy carrier versus using a direct electricity. And you would end up with the same efficiency, whether it was electricity coming from the grid with our current coal and gas-fired and, you know, some renewable energy grid as the input, you would still end up with the 77% and the 33% numbers.
I get that, but I think it's very misleading and avoids the question that we struggle with, which is what the source of the electricity is. And very, you know, I think it's still a low percentage that is clean.
It's 7%.
Thank you. That makes a huge difference. That was all I was asking. Thank you.
Okay. It's 7% today. And there is a path, if we're really energetic, to get it to 100% by 2036. And I'll show you that slide at the end. So I think we were here. Yes. So, right, I just went through the details of the Escalante coal to hydrogen project. Somebody has to pay for this, though. And so who pays for it? Turns out that this oil and gas pipeline company called Tallgrass Energy is the funder behind EH2 Power. And this is their press release, came out August 9th. And so Tallgrass Energy announced that they acquired a 75% membership interest in Escalante Hydrogen Power. And we believe, although they didn't say in their press release, that they supplied, you know, somewhere in the order of 400 million, maybe it was all of the 425 million that it's going to take to do that Escalante power plant conversion. And they own and operate 8,300 miles of natural gas pipeline, in addition to 850 miles of crude pipeline, and this is their chart. And so you can guess that their interest is not in making hydrogen, but in selling natural gas, because that's what they do. There is one other factor that I think they are looking at as a way to make this a viable business from their perspective, which is to utilize the federal tax code and something called the 45Q tax credit, which provides up to $50 per ton of carbon dioxide that is sequestered underground, either for enhanced oil recovery or for permanent storage. So that is a provision in the federal tax code, and I'm sure they are looking at using that as a benefit to make that a profitable venture for them. So, you know, they're going to make hydrogen, and they're also going to harvest federal tax credits. Now we get into how green is blue hydrogen. And this is a very important scientific paper that was published in August 12th of this year by two very well-respected scientists, one at Cornell University, the other at Stanford, Robert Howard and Mark Jacobson. And I put kind of the takeaway from their paper in the red box here, which is, says to call it a zero emissions fuel is totally wrong, referring to blue hydrogen. He's a biogeochemist and ecosystem scientist. And he said, what we found is that it's not even a low emissions fuel either. And the greenhouse gas footprint of blue hydrogen is more than 20% greater than just burning natural gas or coal for heat. So because of the full life cycle emissions costs and the footprint of, you know, that comes from the atmospheric leakage of methane and the electricity that you use to power all of these operations, the steam methane reformer and the air separation unit and all of that stuff, if you look at the carbon footprint of all of those individual steps from a full life cycle analysis, it's 20% worse than just burning natural gas directly. So
or coal.
It is worse.
Coal. That's what it says. Oops.
Yeah, Ashoka, maybe if you could get everybody on mute, that'd be great. And this is a New York Times story on that same paper when it came out. Emphasizes a couple of separate things. I'm just going to point to two additional items, which is, you know, they accounted for the carbon dioxide emissions from methane, the leaks from wells and other equipment during natural gas production. And they used a value of 3.5% leakage because that's what the number of studies, actually 10 different studies that they analyzed showed on average. But they modeled a leakage rate of both 3.5% and all the way down to 1.4%, which is the lower bound of the range that they looked at. And even with that low level of leakage, blue hydrogen is still worse than for the climate than burning methane. Okay, so hydrogen is about 20% worse than just using it directly. And so what is methane doing to our atmosphere? Well, it is responsible for about 25% of all the global warming that we're seeing, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is a chart from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration showing methane concentrations from 1988 to the present day, 2021. And it went from 1,700 parts per billion to 1,900 parts per billion. And you can see that it kind of increased sharply and then leveled off. And then it increased again. And the secondary increase corresponds pretty closely to when the 2008 US shale gas boom took off, when we were really trying to extract lots and lots of natural gas through fracking. And so I don't know that we've ever proved that there's cause and effect here, but the correlation is very strong. And as you know, methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas, global warming potential of about 84 times worse than CO2 over a 24 or 20-year time frame. And so we should not be looking for more opportunities to extract more methane from the ground, which will leak and continue this trend of increasing concentration in the atmosphere. We need to be finding ways of keeping methane in the ground. And I want to make the point that the state of New Mexico and our governor and the Environment Department have done a very good job in the recent months of really trying to put new rules in place to govern methane leakage from the Permian Basin and elsewhere in the state, because it's really bad right now. It's worse than the national average significantly. And so they are basically going to put together a bunch of new rules that will require 98% capture. And 98% capture sounds pretty good, except that what it really means is 2% emissions. And so the US average of oil field emissions is 2.6%, plus another 0.8% from distribution and storage. And even with the New Mexico waste rule, the new rules that are coming, which are going to be 2% emissions, you add that to the 0.8 from distribution, and you still get 2.8%, which is, you know, basically twice as bad as the lower bound of 1.4% leakage that they modeled in that scientific paper that said blue hydrogen was still worse for the climate than just burning natural gas directly. So that's blue hydrogen. So what could we do with Escalante instead of what's being proposed that would actually be beneficial for New Mexico and for the climate? And so I did this analysis. You could take a similar amount of money, but actually $97 million less, and build a solar plus battery 4-hour battery storage plant to put out that same 164 megawatts of clean electricity, which they call nearly firm power if it's got 4-hour battery storage. Only costs you $328 million. And you know, it's $97 million less. And so you've got $97 million left over to figure out how to create 110 jobs. And, you know, simplistically, you could just pay 110 people $88,000 a year for 10 years. And you would have 110 very happy people and still come out ahead, because the electricity that you generate from here would come at a profit versus the maybe break even that's going to come from Escalante. So this is a better use of that kind of money. And if you want to see where those numbers came from, that's my little analysis chart. And getting close to the end here, one of the use cases that they're talking about is using hydrogen in a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, which, you know, I've talked about. So this is what one of those hydrogen fuel cell vehicles look like. This is the biggest seller. It's the Toyota Mirai fuel cell vehicle. And the total fuel cell vehicle market in the country to this year, they think will be maybe 3,000 total vehicles sold, compared to over 600,000 electric vehicles is the US market this year. So it's about a factor of 200 EVs to fuel cell vehicles. And, you know, the economics of hydrogen and the lack of fueling infrastructure is one reason why it's not taken off, and why other auto manufacturers are not also pursuing fuel cell vehicles. This is a chart showing you what the fueling recharging station picture looks like, comparing the two. And you can go energy.gov and plug in some numbers and get these two charts. There are 44,000 electric vehicle public charging stations of level 2 or 3 in the country today, and that's the map. There are 48, literally 48 total hydrogen fuel charging stations in the country, and they are all in California. So if we want fuel cells vehicles and powered by hydrogen to take off as an application, there is a whole fueling network that needs to be built practically from scratch. And it has to compete against an electric vehicle industry that is far, far ahead of them. And this is one of my closing slides. I remember I told Vicki that we have about 7% clean renewable energy on the grid in the country today. That's where this comes from. About 339 gigawatts of nameplate capacity in 2020. If we do what we need to do to get to 100% renewable energy and have a chance of keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees C or somewhere between that and 2, this is kind of the path that we have to take. We need to get to 50% renewable energy by 2030. That's what that would look like, and 100% by 2036. So we have 7% online today. So every bit of renewable energy that we can build should go to doing this, which will then replace the emissions from coal-fired and gas-fired power plants and powering battery electric vehicles so that we can stop buying gasoline and diesel and polluting in that way. And so this is job one. Hydrogen is a distraction from job one. So this is my summary, and I'm not going to go through it in a lot of detail, just to emphasize that, you know, blue hydrogen is really a fossil fuel project to sell more natural gas. And the Escalante project in particular is very expensive. They were relying on harvesting 45Q federal tax credits to build unprofitable electricity and inefficient hydrogen to re-sequester carbon, which should have been left underground in the first place. And we should not fall for this hydrogen hype. So that's my summary slide. I added one more because the Hydrogen Hub Act is out, and I'll just go over these 3 bullets here. So I spent some hours on the weekend reading the bill, the draft bill, which is still pretty preliminary. And these are 3 takeaways. It relies on the false premise that hydrogen is a low emissions fuel, which I think I've shown you it is clearly not. It sets clean hydrogen and carbon intensities for clean hydrogen in the bill with very explicit definitions, the most stringent of which is to allow 3 tons of carbon dioxide to be emitted for every ton of hydrogen that's produced. So yeah, they're going to produce some hydrogen. They call it clean hydrogen while still allowing, you know, 3 times as much carbon dioxide emissions as they produce for hydrogen. It also provides 9 different tax subsidies and deductions for blue hydrogen from methane, which of course end up being more fossil fuel subsidies. So it's something I cannot support at this time. And I am gonna stop sharing my screen here and open it up maybe to Walter and others. If you've got some questions that you want to ask, go ahead.
So Tom, thank you very much. And thank you for the concise talk. It's 7:50, so you did it in about 40 minutes. We do have a lot of questions in the chat. I hope I don't miss people. And I hope people can unmute themselves. So for instance, Ronald Pentilla has several questions. Ronald, do you want to just open up your mute and pose your questions?
No, I don't really have any questions. I think Tom did an excellent job. I knew blue hydrogen was a scam. Now I know exactly why it is. So I much appreciate Tom's excellent presentation.
Okay.
Okay.
One question is from Pia Gallegos. Pia, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Pia.
So I had, I just was wondering, well, I mean, it was sort of a rhetorical question, is why is the governor supporting this?
Yeah, I am struggling with that question myself, Pia. And so, you know, she hasn't told me. I can speculate. One major reason is that in the infrastructure bill that just got signed this week, there is a bucket of $8 billion that's been allocated to build out 4 hydrogen hubs in 4 different states, which means $2 billion per hydrogen hub. So I pretty confident that looking at that $2 billion investment for the state of New Mexico is part of her motivation. I can't believe that she's been told the honest truth about hydrogen because it is in direct opposition to her published executive order on climate that she published in the first week of her term in 2019. Pursuing blue hydrogen with this definition of clean hydrogen of 3 tons of carbon dioxide per ton of hydrogen is going to increase the state's carbon footprint. At the same time, she's committed to reducing it 45% by 2030. So you can't do both of those things. And, you know, one of my motivations for putting this presentation together and educating as many people as I can, including the 8 legislators that I presented it to, is try to provide the counterpoint to that, so that when it comes time for the bill to be reviewed in the legislature, there are some people who can ask the critical questions.
So I think Pam Neese has some questions in the chat. I see that she asks, is the 2% methane leakage based on current production, or is it capped at 2% of current production going forward, even if production doubles?
My understanding, having looked into that and asked some of the interveners that were working with the state to draft the methane rules, is that it's what they call it is 98% capture. So 98% of the methane that's produced in the oil fields or the methane fields through fracking is intended to be captured for transmission to end use customers, which then allows 2% of it to not be captured, which ends up being emitted into the atmosphere in various valves and fittings and all of the other ways that methane gets emitted through that whole process, which I can't pretend to understand in general. So it's 2% of all methane that is produced in New Mexico would be emitted and not captured for transmission to end use customers. That's my understanding, with some exceptions, because even with that 98% capture, there are some notable exceptions, like, I don't know, well completions, and there are incidents where they do allow venting and flaring at the beginning of a fracking process, and they don't count that. And so the 98% capture is a bit of a best case. So that's what I know.
Charles Bennett has his hand up.
Yeah. Hello. Hi, Tom. Yeah, this bill's inevitably going to be placed before Senator Cervantes. I think from our past experience, we know where he stands with this. How can we approach him? Or have you attempted to?
I have done 4 legislative briefings at various times during the day and the night. And I sent invitations to the entire Democratic caucus, didn't choose to invite the Republicans for reasons you might guess at. I invited them, and all the ones that were interested showed up, and he was not one of them. So I don't have a way to encourage him beyond that to listen to the message. If you have a relationship with Senator Cervantes or know someone in the southern part of the state who might be able to, approach him, and I would be happy to set up a special briefing for him. But I don't have the power to make that happen.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
We have a question from Rachel Coleman, who asks, what about nuclear? Rachel, you might want to elaborate on that question.
Well, I was just looking at the slide showing it's going to be a big chunk of wind and a big chunk of solar. And I recently saw an email that came across my desk arguing that, the only way we can solve this quickly is nuclear. So I understand it's not the main point of the presentation, but I'm trying to educate myself about that.
Okay. Yeah, more nuclear energy is just really a non-starter as a climate solution. It takes, 9 to 12 years to build a new nuclear power plant on the best case. And they've been trying to build a couple of them in Georgia, and it's dragged on for, they're into 15 or 20 years, and they're $25 billion over budget, and it's just like not going to happen. So that's what I had. We could talk more about nuclear at another time, but it is really just not a viable climate solution for so many reasons.
Sandra Stolberg has her hand up.
Hi, thanks so much for putting on this talk, Tom. We had a meeting with Senator Heinrich's office, and it was a little disturbing the way that they responded to our questions. And they said that the arguments that they were hearing now about blue hydrogen were the same as they were against solar and wind power back in the day, that it's too dangerous, we shouldn't do it. I was not involved in those things. I don't know about those arguments, so I didn't quite understand it. But I'd like to know how to respond to that. And then that they were concerned that there's only one study that's saying that blue hydrogen is not good. I don't know if that means that there's lots of studies saying that blue hydrogen is good. And then they also talked about that there are certain applications where we're simply not going to be able to switch to electric for a very long time, such as, you know, air flight and things like that. Can you respond to that and help me understand how to best to?
I'd be happy to. There are probably 4 viable uses of hydrogen to decarbonize sectors of the economy that will be very hard to decarbonize in another way. And you listed a few of them. And in fact, Senator Heinrich has a draft bill that I've seen, at least in bullet form, that focuses on just those. But as I said, that's not what industry is talking about here with their push for blue hydrogen. So, you know, and those sectors are ocean transportation, long distance airline traffic, right? Transoceanic airline flights. Hard to imagine anytime soon, you know, batteries being light enough to power an electric airplane, which do exist, to go across the Atlantic. So those are 2. And then we already talked about the fact that manufacturing concrete and also manufacturing steel are 2 very carbon intensive processes. Manufacturing concrete basically starts with calcium carbonate, and all the carbonate and the calcium goes up as CO2 in the atmosphere, plus all of the energy it takes to heat it up. That generates an enormous amount of CO2 emissions, and the coal and coke that's put into making steel ends up with carbon dioxide emissions. There are very viable technologies that are being pursued at a pilot scale and investigated using hydrogen to replace carbon in those steel and concrete manufacturing processes that I think really are quite viable. But as I said in one of my slides, that's like job 4. Job 1 has to be to rapidly decarbonize our electric grid and build out massive amounts of renewable energy very quickly so that we get 50% of it online by 2030, which by my calendar is 9 years from now. And doing that looks like mobilizing to win World War II, and we are not doing that yet. And so applying precious renewable energy that could be used to decarbonize the grid to instead make hydrogen as job 4 in the current day is the wrong priority. It is a distraction away from job 1. So, you know, I think there's a case to be made for R&D to be developed and to have these use cases. And when we build out the grid and we've got a surplus of renewable energy, then making hydrogen to decarbonize those other sectors, that's the right order in which to go after that set of solutions. But pursuing, and especially using methane to make hydrogen today and releasing all of this additional CO2 in the atmosphere, which doesn't need to be done, absolutely the wrong thing to do. And I would be very happy to talk to Mike Sullivan about that. And that is nothing like the arguments against solar and wind in the early day. Nothing. There's no comparison.
We have a question from Sally Beers. She asks, how do we get our governor to back off from this project?
So, you know, you can call her up. Somebody asked in the chat for a link to the bill. I don't actually have a link to the bill. It was sent to me as an email attachment from Secretary Probst on Monday. And it went to a kind of a smaller group of people, and I think it's inappropriate to send it to everybody, and I'd have to upload it to the cloud in order to make a link to put it out. It's quite likely that it'll come out in the press in the coming days, because I think the Journal has maybe gotten a copy of it. So it's quite likely there will be a story about the hydrogen hub bill pretty soon. And then the conversations will start. So, you know, contacting her, contacting your own state representative and state senator, very appropriate. Express your opinion about what this is, and you know, express extreme caution in terms of pursuing this. And you know, if this bill really does get introduced in anything like its current form, there are massive amendments that will be needed before it's anywhere close to being acceptable.
We have a very active chat. It's almost overwhelming.
Okay.
I'd like to have Steffi unmute herself and say something. She had several things in the chat, and I see that Larry James has his hand up. So you're next.
Okay. And I see we have a State Senator Brenda McKenna online here too. So if at any point Senator McKenna wants to unmute,
refer to Senator McKenna.
you can do that too.
Okay. Steffi?
Well, I didn't really have any specific questions. The only question I had was about, Tom, when you were talking about Escalante, about what the efficiencies were involved in using hydrogen to produce electricity after you've used electricity to create hydrogen. It seemed a little.
Yeah, so what's the efficiency of combusting hydrogen?
Yes.
To make to burn and boil water? I'd said that would require me to do some additional research, which I probably should do at some point, but I don't know. I did look to the extent to figure out that General Electric is actually manufacturing gas turbines that can be run on some mixture of natural gas and hydrogen, possibly up to 100% hydrogen. So that's, yeah, but I don't know that answer.
Does Senator McKenna have any statement to make?
Good evening. Thank you, Tom. Walter, could you repeat that? I was distracted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just giving you an opportunity as one of our elected officials to make a statement.
Yeah, please too. And I'm so glad that I can call Tom my friend, because in its present form, there's no way I would support a bill like this. I was really disappointed with what happened in Glasgow, Scotland. And I really like Tom's analogy of we should be working towards getting ourselves ready like the way we did in World War II. And I am just perplexed and rather outraged that we're not doing so. So that's my top line message for this evening, Walter. And I'm so glad that we have someone like Tom and New Mexico Solar and others that are willing to share their knowledge with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKenna. Is there anybody else that would like to ask a question? Just unmute yourself.
Tom, I would like to ask, produced water is somewhere in this scenario, and I can't pinpoint, but it is such a problem, and I'm just wondering where it might be. Or
yeah, It's peripheral. I'll tell you where I can imagine it. And I'm not sure produced water makes any sense. If you read the Hydrogen Hub Act, there is a provision that says, none of these tax credits or deductions can be applied to electrolysis of fresh water. And they're very specific about the term fresh water, which, you could imagine leaves the door open to other kinds of non-fresh water. And produced water has got such a toxic mix of chemicals in it. I'm not sure that it could be used without immense purification in an electrolysis cell without just gumming it up and destroying it pretty quickly. Using brackish water, which is just, I understand it's just really saline, might be an option for electrolysis, but that's about the extent of my thinking. I have heard people talked about using produced water for electrolysis. I think there's a whole lot of thinking and analysis that needs to be done before we go anywhere near that path.
I have a question. You made a statement that green hydrogen requires a lot of water. I'm not sure if that's correct, because I think a little bit of water makes a hell of a lot of hydrogen. So you might want to check that statement.
Well, you're right. But I mean, it depends on how much hydrogen you make.
Yeah, right.
And if they're talking about lots and lots of hydrogen, then it's lots and lots of water. And water is an increasingly precious commodity in New Mexico. And I think it would also probably be politically unpalatable to have people say, let's, in addition to fracking water, let's also use it to make hydrogen. I don't know how well that would go down in the state. I'm just imagining.
I'll do a little calculation and see.
Okay.
I see that Jim McKenzie has his hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, Walter, there are a couple of questions that circulating that I might be able to shed some light on. By way of expertise, I helped build the first the Escalante power plant, the initial plant. I didn't design it, but I helped build it. So, Tom, the question was, what's the efficiency of burning hydrogen to make electricity? In general, converting chemical energy, i.e. hydrogen or coal or other kinds of chemical energy to electrical energy is you get about 40%, roughly 40% of the energy from the original fuel as electricity. So, it might be 42, 3, but there are theoretical limits. And so it's basically boiling water to make electricity is very inefficient, and it's kind of 20th century way of making power. We no longer have to boil water to make power. So that's part of it. And then there's the water. So when you're using, making electricity using thermal energy, you have to have a cooling cycle. And all power plants, whether they're nuclear or coal or natural gas or hydrogen, use a lot of water as a coolant. And you can break that down into the amount of water that circulates to the system and then how much is actually consumed, but it's a lot of water. So that plant, and I'm not familiar with what the water rights situation is at that plant, who owns the water and everything, but it will use a lot of water to make electricity.
Thank you, Jim. I see we have something in the chat from Katie and Andrew Stone. The question was, how much water is used per megawatt hour to create green hydrogen? That was my question. But then the other question, how much for blue hydrogen with all that steam reforming, et cetera? and cooling water and blah, blah, blah.
Right. Tell you what, let me look at my slide deck and see if I have a backup slide on that. I looked at that once and I don't remember the answer. I did find out that it takes 50 kilowatt hours to make 1 kilogram of hydrogen through electrolysis. So
yeah, that's
that number.
Yeah.
Let's see. Might be in a different slide deck, but water consumption to make hydrogen. Here, I'll share my screen again. It's been a while since I looked at this slide, so we're going to have to read it together. So this is, what's the scale here? Well, average life cycle consumption with battery electric and fuel cell vehicles is 2 gallons per 100 miles for a battery electric vehicle, electrolysis using the grid, 65 gallons per 100 miles for a fuel cell vehicle.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's
I don't.
a big difference.
Yeah. I don't know if this is answering that question. This looks like it's specifically looking at the transportation aspect, either a gas car, a battery car, or a fuel cell car. So this isn't necessarily answering that question.
I guess my only point would be.
Go ahead, Andrew. Yeah.
My only point would be that when we're having arguments of why here in New Mexico with the 50-year water plan projecting no water, we really can't be just throwing our water away. And that's why it's important if water is a major component of its production or use. That should be highlighted.
Yeah, so steam methane reforming clearly uses water. There's no question about it because it's the steam and steam methane reforming. So that's an answer that we should probably get or ask the governor's office as part of vetting the bill to provide that answer and to justify why that's a good use for New Mexico's diminishing supply of fresh water.
Charles Bennett has his hand up. I'm not sure if that's just left over from an earlier question.
That's
Charles?
okay. Yeah. Someone asked about the produced water in relationship to manufacturing blue hydrogen, and if you use oil and gas to make it, and you frack for that oil and gas, then you're going to end up with produced water.
You'll make more produced water. That's a point. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Are there any other questions? If not, we could.
I see from Mike Neese, where are the Navajos on the Escalante plant plan? I don't know if there is a single consolidated answer. I have certainly heard, who is it, Joseph? I'm trying to remember his last name, a Navajo from the NAVA EP organization, speaking out very strongly in opposition to this blue hydrogen proposal and the Escalante power plant. In fact, he testified before one of the legislative committees in the last couple of weeks. But whether, I don't know the extent to which he can speak for the Navajo Nation, but certainly that's one voice in opposition. Joseph is here. Okay. Joseph, are you here? You want to answer that question yourself?
Yes, thank you, Tom.
Yes, thanks, Joseph.
Navajo Nation is a resource dependent nation. So, they're looking at ways of they understand, tribal council knows that the revenue source from the coal plants and is going to, the projections are going down. There was just a hearing today in one of the tribal committee hearings on legislation that they want to look at carbon offsets, for the forest. So it's they're wanting to get into the cap and trade. I mean, it's just they're looking at other ways of trying to, you know, create revenue, but they're looking at going at it in the wrong direction. You know, and I know President Nez has his what's called the Sunrise Proclamation, which is to pursue and prioritize renewable energy development for the long-term benefit of the Navajo people. And so, but yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that needs to be understood with hydrogen, and that's one thing that the message that what we're sending to the governor's office is just that you know, the state of New Mexico is not educating the impacted communities about you know, this policy. They're nobody knows about this policy, and so that's where we're at, you know, is to consult the community. So thank you.
As it should be done. Thank you, Joseph. I apologize for not remembering your last name, but I understand you were very eloquent in your testimony before the interim committee. So thank you for that.
Okay, are there any other final questions?
Walter, can I just say something?
Yes, Steffi.
Yeah, one thing I've been noticing in a lot of different contexts, starting with the 50-year water plan and the climate change report in it, and in energy contexts, and is that a lot of people are not saying what everyone knows, and they're just ignoring the basic problems. For example, in the 50-year water plan, everyone is talking now about resiliency and sustainability, and how are we going to protect and develop water resources. And the problem is that fossil fuels are creating climate change, which is getting rid of all of our water. And nobody will say that. If you bring this up in the water plan talks, they quietly turn you off and defer what you say. And I think that, you know, people are not hearing how serious climate change is going to affect New Mexico, how serious our water problems are going to be, how much our landscape is going to change in the next few decades. And that's what is letting all these other things through, because what people really care about is money, bottom line. And people, you know, don't say that.
That's absolutely right. And just to add to what Steffi said, as countries around the world go into famine and violence and war, that will affect all of us with immigration and autocrats coming into power and blaming people and these sorts of things. So I just support what Steffi said about climate being very, very fundamental and essential.